It really hits me sometimes. Every organization, it doesn't matter if they're massive or tiny, they're all kind of walking this tightrope.
Oh, yeah.
You've got on one side, all this potential for growth and opportunity, but then right there on the other side is, well, the chance for things to go wrong, big setbacks. And knowing how to manage those risks, that's not just about like avoiding disaster. It's about actually reaching your goals. And that's what this deep dive is all about today. We're digging into this really sharp article by Pritesh Biswas, and it gets into something really fundamental: risk competencies and risk training.
You got it. We talk a lot about like the mechanics of risk management, all
Yeah.
the processes, the frameworks. The thing is, how well all that works, it really comes down to the people involved,
Yeah.
what they can actually do. So in this deep dive, we're unpacking those core skills,
Yeah.
that knowledge base, those abilities that are just crucial, what we call those risk competencies.
Right.
And just as important, we'll look at how organizations can actually build these competencies, real practical training. That's the key.
So our mission today, it's like giving you this clear roadmap. What are these risk competencies? Why do they matter so much in business today? And then some real strategies that organizations can use to help their teams develop these skills.
That's it.
We're not going super theoretical here. The goal is you walk away with stuff you can use right now without getting lost in the weeds.
And Pritesh Biswas, in this article, he lays out a really solid plan. Not just what these competencies are, but how organizations can get people up to speed.
Okay, so let's jump in. The article starts by defining what we mean by risk practitioner competencies. What's the heart of this whole idea?
Well, at its core, risk practitioner competency, it's that mix of skills, the knowledge, and the ability to actually deal with risks head on.
Okay.
You got to be able to spot them, assess them, manage them, and then, mitigate those risks an organization faces. And the whole point of it, it's to help the organization get to its goals, while keeping those threats in check.
Right.
What's really interesting is it's not just about knowing the technical side of risk management.
Yeah.
You need to think analytically, have strong people skills, and even some strategic awareness.
It's bigger than just the technical stuff then. The article, it lays out steps for how organizations can figure out which competencies they specifically need. It's not a one-size-fits-all deal. Right?
Absolutely not. The article really stresses a systematic way of doing it. It starts with like this crucial step: defining core competencies, those bedrock skills and knowledge you got to have for risk management, but within your organization's own setting.
Got it.
So we're talking about like being able to do a solid risk assessment, really knowing the regulations, maybe even having some understanding of financial analysis, how to plan strategically. And this is being able to communicate all this risk information clearly. That's huge.
Those sound like the essentials. And then there's this emphasis on established frameworks. For someone who might not be as familiar, what are these frameworks and why do they matter?
These are like the gold standard in the industry. Best practices, guidelines that give you a structure for thinking about risk competencies. The article mentions a few, like ISO 31000, that gives you those principles and guidelines for risk management overall. Then there's COSO ERM, which focuses on enterprise risk management, and the IRM Risk Management Professional Competency Framework. That's another one.
Okay.
These frameworks, they give you a clear structure outlining different levels of competency and what skills and knowledge you need at each level. So it's like a universal language, benchmarks, so organizations don't have to start from nothing.
That makes sense. You've got this universally agreed upon set of standards to go off of. Next up, the article talks about role-based competency mapping. How does an organization go about doing that?
Here's where it gets really tailored. The organization matches its competency needs to specific jobs in its risk management function. For example, let's say you're a risk analyst. You'd probably need some serious expertise in data analysis and modeling, right? But a chief risk officer, a CRO, they'd probably need more focus on strategic thinking, leadership, being able to talk to the board. So it's about getting the skills you need to manage risk well. They change based on what you're doing and where you are in the risk management team.
So very targeted, making sure people have the right skills for their specific work. After that, the article goes into assessing current skills. How do organizations usually do that?
There are a few good methods they mention. Self-assessments, where people look at their own skills and compare them to those competencies. That's often a starting point. Then there are evaluations from managers. They give a supervisory perspective. Some places go for more objective assessments using third-party audits or tests. The point is to get a clear picture of where people are at, skills-wise, both in the dedicated risk management team and wider in the whole organization if everyone shares that responsibility.
Once an organization knows where its people stand, what's the next logical step?
You go straight into gap analysis. This means taking those current skill levels and comparing them to those desired competencies that the organization set out. Right? By seeing the difference, the gaps between where they are and where they want to be, the organization can zero in on what needs work. Where do individuals or whole teams need to improve or learn something new?
Finding the gaps is one thing, but fixing them is where it gets real. The article talks about training and development. What kind of stuff are we talking about here?
It covers a lot of potential initiatives. Could be formal workshops, training courses, chances to get professional certifications in risk management. Then you've got on-the-job training, shadowing, mentoring, where more experienced people guide those who are still developing. The key is, whatever you do, it's got to be targeted. Aim those programs right at the gaps you found in that analysis. It's a strategic investment in your people.
And it's not just a one-time thing, right? The article says performance metrics and feedback are important too. Why is that?
Because you got to keep getting better, right? And to make sure all that risk management work is actually helping the organization reach its goals, you need ways to measure if it's working. Regular feedback to the risk practitioners, that helps them see their strong points and where they can grow. It's like this loop. Assess, develop, refine. Keep going.
And lastly, the article says adapting to changing organizational needs is key. Makes sense? Business moves fast.
For sure. The whole risk landscape is always shifting, right? Business environment changes, new regulations, technology keeps advancing, even the organization's own goals change. So that competency framework, it's got to be alive. You review it, you update it, and you make sure those needed skills and knowledge stay relevant for the organization now and in the future.
Okay, that's a really solid rundown of how organizations can figure out and build those risk practitioner competencies. Then the article goes into this idea of seeing risk management not just as a task, but as a real profession. What's important about that shift?
It means people are starting to see risk management as its own thing, a specialized field that needs a clear structure of skills, knowledge, and abilities, like accounting or law or engineering.
Right.
It's about moving away from just dealing with risk as it pops up and going towards a more planned, proactive, professional approach, with recognized standards and ways for practitioners to grow in the field.
And they emphasize that you need both hard skills, the technical stuff, and soft skills, the people skills. Why are both so important?
Well, the technical or hard skills, those are the specific things you need to actually do the risk management work. So that could be stuff like quantitative risk analysis, understanding regulations, or using special risk management software. The interpersonal or soft skills, those are key for actually putting those risk strategies to work in an organization. So things like communication, working with people, being able to influence stakeholders, negotiation, even leadership skills. You need both. You need the technical knowledge to make sense of the risks, and you need those people skills to communicate them well, get people on board with solutions, and build a culture where everyone's aware of the risks.
It's knowing the stuff and working with people. The article mentions two key areas of expertise that risk practitioners need: a good grasp of risk management practices and solid business skills. Why are both important?
So a risk practitioner, they got to really understand those core principles, the methods, frameworks, and tools of risk management. That's their main thing. But to be truly effective, they got to get the bigger picture too.
Yeah.
They need to understand the business, how it operates, its industry, even the wider economy and regulations. That savvy, it lets them adapt that risk management framework to the specific goals, the challenges, and how much risk the organization is willing to take. Makes it way more relevant and useful.
It's interesting they highlight business skills, but then say the primary focus for practitioners should still be building those core technical skills, the ones directly about risk management. Why make that distinction?
Because when it comes down to it, a risk practitioner's main job is to create, put in place, and keep going a strong risk management program. Understanding the business is important for tailoring it, sure, but the foundation has got to be those technical aspects. Being able to identify, assess, analyze, and respond to risks using the right methods and tools. That's paramount. Those business skills, they help you apply those technical skills in the right way within the organization.
Let's break down those technical skills. The article gets pretty detailed, categorizing them based on the stages of risk management. First, the skills for planning that overall risk management strategy. What are we talking about here?
It highlights two big things: evaluate status and develop strategy.
Okay.
Evaluating the status, that's like taking stock of where the organization is at, risk-wise. So understanding the whole context, the strategic goals, and mapping out all the risks, both from the outside world and from within the organization's own operations. It's about knowing the lay of the land. Then develop strategy. That means coming up with the overall plan, the policies for risk management, and setting up a language everyone in the organization will use when talking about risk. Consistent communication, that's key.
So step one, know where you stand with risk, then decide where you want to go and how to get there. Next set of skills is about actually implementing that risk management architecture. What does that look like in practice?
This is putting the plan into action. You've got design architecture. That means figuring out the specific structures for risk management in the organization, who's responsible for what at different levels, how everything fits together.
Right.
Then develop processes. That's about creating those step-by-step procedures and protocols for managing risk day to day. And finally, build awareness. This is huge.
Yeah.
It's about building a culture where the whole organization is aware of risk. Risk management isn't this separate thing, it's part of everything, all the business activities and decisions.
So taking the plan and making it part of how the organization operates, how people think. The third category of skills is about measuring how well those risk management efforts are doing. How does an organization do that well?
It's a few things, all connected. Facilitate assessments. That means guiding those processes of identifying, analyzing, evaluating risks across the organization, and making sure all that risk info is documented properly. Then, evaluate controls. That's checking how well your existing controls, the things in place to reduce risk, are actually doing. Are they working as planned? Are they actually lowering the chances of things going wrong, or the impact if they do? And improve controls, that's about designing and implementing ways to make those controls better, more cost-effective, wherever you found weaknesses.
So it's this constant cycle. Assess risks, see if your measures are working, and make them better. The last set of technical skills the article talks about is learning from the organization's experience with risk management. What's involved there?
This is where the organization looks back at what they've done
Yep.
and adapts. Evaluate framework means periodically checking the whole strategy, policies, processes, seeing if they can be improved, and then making those changes. Then, design reports. This is understanding what different stakeholders need to know about risk, from senior management and the board to operational teams. It's about creating the right reports, the formats, and getting that key risk information to the right people in a timely and useful way.
So making sure the risk management system itself isn't static, but is constantly being reviewed, improved based on what's actually happening. Then the article makes this really important distinction between risk competency and risk skills, which people often mix up. What's the difference?
This is key. The article says risk competency is the bigger picture, that overall ability to understand, assess, manage, and communicate risks well. It's all those things combined. A person's knowledge, specific skills, their experience, and using good judgment in a specific situation. It's not just about knowing the technical stuff, it's about thinking critically, seeing the whole picture, and really understanding the organization's context, where those risks come from, and how to manage them.
So it's this whole package. How is that different from risk skills?
Risk skills are those specific things a person can do when managing risk,
Okay.
like identifying potential risks, doing an assessment using particular tools, analyzing data to see risk trends, communicating risk info to different people, or coming up with scenarios. These skills, you often learn them through specific training and experience.
The article uses this helpful comparison. It says that specific skills are task-oriented, but they don't automatically mean someone is competent overall. They need to understand how and when to use those skills.
Exactly. Someone might know how to do a quantitative risk analysis or use a certain software, but without the bigger picture, the knowledge, experience, and judgment to know when to apply that skill in the organization's specific situation and to understand the results. Just having that skill alone might not lead to good outcomes. The article says it well. Skills are like the individual bricks, but competency is the whole structure, making sure those bricks are used right to build a solid risk management system.
That's a really clear way to explain the difference. Now, the article says that mix of technical and interpersonal skills is so important for good risk practitioners. And it breaks down technical skills further into those that are specifically risk-related and those that are more general business skills. What are some of those broader business skills that a risk practitioner might need?
So these are things that, while not only about risk management, are super important for applying those principles in a real organization. Things like a basic understanding of finances, accounting, awareness of the laws and regulations, knowing how HR works, understanding marketing and sales, being familiar with operational procedures, and knowing about IT and cybersecurity issues.
Yeah, sí.
What specific skills are most important will depend on the industry and what the organization actually does.
And we talked about how important those soft skills, the people skills, are getting. The article makes this interesting connection, linking technical skills with intellectual intelligence and soft skills with emotional intelligence. What's that about?
It's saying that a well-rounded risk manager needs to be good in both areas, thinking and people. You need the brains, the technical skills, the analysis to grasp complex risks, but you also need that emotional intelligence, the soft skills to handle the human side of risk management. Being able to communicate those risks clearly and in a way that gets people's attention, building those strong relationships, influencing decisions, creating a collaborative environment where everyone's aware of risk. You need both sides for real success.
So it's the know-how and knowing how to work with people. Then they talk about self-management and personal development for risk managers. What kind of stuff falls under that?
It's a few things. A strong sense of ethics, sticking to that professional code of conduct,
Yeah.
and always being willing to learn and grow professionally, always getting more knowledge and better skills. It's also about managing your own time and workload well, taking initiative, being able to bounce back from challenges, and being open to feedback, using it to get better, both personally and professionally. Maybe even mentoring others, helping them develop in the field. It's about personal accountability and always striving to improve.
And then they group those all-important people skills into what they call CRAM skills. Can you walk us through what that means?
CRAM. It's a good way to remember the key interpersonal skills for risk people. So C is for communication, both written and spoken. That includes presentation skills and active listening. R is for relationship building, being able to connect with people, influence them, negotiate well, handle conflict. A is analytical thinking, but here it's more about understanding people and how organizations work, being strategic and creative when solving problems, using data to back up your points. And lastly, M is for management skills. Time management, managing projects, leadership, and being able to facilitate things.
It's really interesting. The article points out that technical skills, you can often learn them through training and practice, but these people skills are often more about personality and can be tougher to develop. But as we said, they're crucial for doing well in risk management.
Exactly. You can teach someone how to do a risk assessment or navigate regulations, no problem. But teaching them how to influence someone who's resisting, build trust between different departments, or deal with office politics, that takes a different approach. It often relies on those natural interpersonal abilities.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you can't develop these skills,
Mhm.
but it takes more effort, self-awareness, the right kind of support, and feedback.
Let's dig deeper into those people skills for risk management practitioners, as the article calls them. Starting with communication, what's highlighted as particularly important?
Obviously, being able to communicate well, both in writing and speaking. That's the foundation. Explaining complex risks clearly, concisely, and convincingly, that's huge.
Right.
But they also specifically mention presentation and public speaking skills. Got to be able to share those risk insights with different groups, from senior management down to operational teams, and being able to participate well in committees and meetings, contributing to discussions, making sure everyone can talk openly about risk. That's important too.
What about relationship skills? What's crucial there for someone working in risk?
This is about building and keeping those good working relationships with all those stakeholders. The article talks about influencing skills, being able to guide people, even when they're being difficult or resisting. Negotiation's important too for resolving conflicts, finding solutions everyone can agree on, and getting people on board with strategies for reducing risk. And then networking is key for making connections across different departments, building collaboration, making sure everyone sees risk management as a shared thing.
And then there's analytical skills within that CRAM framework, which is a little different here. What's that about in terms of people skills?
Here, analytical isn't so much about crunching numbers.
Yeah.
It's more about being strategic and creative when dealing with people and situations. So, understanding those complex relationships within an organization, figuring out what assumptions people are making, maybe even biases, thinking critically about different perspectives, and being innovative when solving problems. It also means being able to gather and understand information about people and the organization's culture to help manage those risks.
And finally, M in CRAM is for management. What parts of management matter most for risk practitioners, even if they don't have people reporting to them directly?
Even if you're not managing a whole team, Understanding management is crucial for influencing and moving those risk initiatives forward. So knowing how to delegate tasks well, how to motivate individuals and teams, and how to manage projects, that all helps you reach your risk goals. As we said, a lot of those people skills translate directly to good management.
The article emphasizes that motivation is a key skill, especially for promoting that risk-aware culture and getting people to change their behavior in ways that reduce risk.
Absolutely. A big part of the job is getting people, individuals, and teams to think proactively about risk and be more conscious of it.
Yeah.
That often means communicating why risk management is important, getting buy-in for strategies, and motivating people to change how they do things to be safer. And the article also mentions self-management skills for the risk practitioners themselves, like being able to prioritize, meet deadlines, stay motivated, manage their time well, and stay organized.
They also explain the difference between management and leadership and why leadership's so vital in enterprise risk management, or ERM. Can you talk about the differences, especially with risk?
Management is often about, the planning, organizing, directing, controlling resources to get things done, usually within set procedures, and with a focus on efficiency and minimizing immediate risks. Leadership is more about setting the vision, inspiring people working together, and giving teams the power to handle uncertainty and reach those long-term goals. When it comes to risk, a manager might focus on making sure everyone's following the existing risk controls, while a leader in ERM would be thinking bigger picture, explaining why risk management matters strategically, aligning risk strategies with the business goals, and creating a culture where risk is part of every decision, even if that means taking some calculated risks to go after opportunities.
Why are these leadership skills so important for good ERM?
Because ERM isn't just about managing each risk separately.
Yeah.
It's about looking at all the significant risks and opportunities across the whole organization and making risk part of those big strategic decisions. A good ERM leader, they can influence decisions at every level. They can communicate clearly why risk management matters for reaching those goals, and they can build that risk-aware culture where people talk openly about risk and everyone takes responsibility.
Yeah.
They need to build confidence that the organization can handle uncertainty and get people excited about proactive risk management.
Okay.
They also need strong analytical and problem-solving skills to balance risk and opportunity and make sure the ERM framework is flexible and changes as the organization does. ERM leadership is not just managing the risks, it's inspiring teams, building resilience, and making sure risk management is part of the organization's success now and in the future.
Then the article talks about the history of risk communication as a field. They say it goes back to the late 1970s in response to public worries about things like nuclear power and chemicals. What was the approach to risk communication back then, and why didn't it really work?
Back then, experts thought that if they just gave people clear, accurate info about the risks, that would be enough to calm them down and build trust.
Yeah.
Just the facts. But it didn't really work because it missed a big part of the picture. How people actually perceive risk.
Yeah.
It's not just about data and science. It's about emotions, personal experiences, cultural values, all these psychological and social things. Focusing only on the facts and ignoring how people actually feel about risk. Those early attempts at communication, they often just didn't connect, sometimes even made people less trusting.
So it's not just what you say, it's understanding who you're talking to, their emotions, and building that trust. The article also says that good crisis communication really depends on the groundwork you lay beforehand, the trust you've built before a crisis even happens.
Totally. You can't expect to suddenly communicate well and be believable in a crisis if you haven't already built those relationships.
Right.
If you haven't been open and transparent before, if you haven't earned that trust, the relationships you make, the credibility you have, and how you communicate normally, that all matters so much when a crisis hits. It affects how people see what you say and how well you can manage the situation.
Now, let's talk about consistency in risk management. The article says that one big goal of sharing risk info and doing training is to make sure everyone in the organization responds in a similar way to similar risks. How can organizations do that?
There are a few ways to get that consistency. First, making sure everyone learns from past experiences, sharing that knowledge across the organization. Then, having a standard way of identifying, assessing, and responding to different types of risks, whether it's a hazard, a control issue, or an opportunity. Tools like a good intranet can be really helpful for giving everyone access to the same risk information, policies, procedures. That helps everyone be on the same page. And it's crucial to set up those risk protocols for different situations and to be consistent in how you handle individual risks, whether they're strategic, project-related, or operational. Like, the article talks about always including a risk assessment when you're asking for money for a project or doing strategic analysis. That makes sure risk is part of every big decision.
Then they talk about this issues manual. What's that for?
An issues manual is like a central place where you keep info about specific risks, events, or situations that the organization has said, okay, this is how we're going to handle this.
Right.
It basically documents the agreed upon way to deal with these things. So if something similar happens again, everyone knows the protocol. It keeps those responses consistent, and it helps build on what you've learned from past experience.
And they emphasize providing good information, supervision, and training as key to getting that consistency in risk management across the board. They also talk about having clear escalation procedures for new risks or risks that have changed a lot, and making sure people are trained on when and how to use them.
Right. When the risks change or something new pops up, you got to have a clear process for bringing it up to the right people so it can be dealt with quickly. Training makes sure everyone knows those escalation steps and understands their role in the process. The article also highlights how important it is to be consistent in how you respond to crises. They say training on those disaster recovery plans and business continuity procedures is key, so everyone knows what to do if something major happens.
So let's talk about setting up a good risk communication framework in an organization. The article has these 10 steps. Can you give us a rundown?
Sure. You start by figuring out exactly what you want to achieve with your risk communication, your goals. Then you got to figure out who needs to be in the loop, both inside and outside the organization, who needs to get this risk info, or give you feedback. Next, you pick the best ways to reach each group. Step 4 is about creating those standard protocols and guidelines for communicating risk info, so it's consistent and clear. Step 5 is making sure everyone's trained on those protocols and they know their part in it. Sixth, you got to encourage two-way communication, make space for feedback and discussion. Seventh, tailor your message to who you're talking to, what they know, and what their needs are. Step 8 is making sure those escalation procedures are clear and everyone knows them, so if something new or big pops up, senior management is in the loop fast.
Right.
Step 9 is setting up ways to track how well your communication is working. Get feedback, look at the data, see what needs to be improved. And finally, step 10 is all about being flexible and always making those improvements based on what you learn.
So that's a really clear plan for building that strong communication framework. Now, connecting risk training with the whole risk culture of the organization, they use the acronym ILA to describe the key parts of a good risk culture. What does that stand for, and how does training fit in?
A LILAC stands for leadership, involvement, learning, accountability, and communication.
Okay.
When you think about training, involvement, learning, accountability, and communication are really key. Good training programs actively get people involved in understanding and managing the risks in their work.
Yeah.
They help people learn by giving them the knowledge and skills they need. When training includes clear documents and communication, it helps people understand their specific responsibilities and what they're accountable for when it comes to risk. And of course, good training itself relies on good communication, so people get the information clearly and feel like they can ask questions. So, training reinforces several key parts of a positive risk culture.
So training isn't just teaching facts, it's about shaping how the whole organization thinks about and deals with risk. The article goes into detail about different types of training that organizations should think about. Can you highlight the most important ones?
Sure. First, you got to have general risk awareness training that gives every employee the basics. What is risk, the different kinds, how it can affect the organization, and why risk management matters.
Okay.
Then you've got role-specific risk training that's tailored to the specific risks and responsibilities of different jobs or departments. Risk assessment and analysis training teaches people how to identify, analyze, and evaluate risks using things like risk matrices, SWOT analysis, PESTLE analysis, and figure out the likelihood and impact. Then, compliance and regulatory training is key to making sure everyone understands the rules, both industry regulations and legal stuff, and follows them. That helps avoid penalties and keeps the organization's reputation safe. Crisis management and business continuity training prepares everyone to handle big disruptions, to respond well and get back on track. Risk communication skills training focuses on, communicating clearly about risks to different audiences. Ethics and decision-making training helps people understand the ethical side of risk management and promotes making decisions that are transparent and responsible. Cultural and behavioral training aims to get everyone's behavior aligned with that good risk culture, being open and proactive about risk. Scenario-based training uses simulations and real cases to help people apply what they've learned and build confidence in dealing with different situations. And finally, leadership and change management training gives leaders the skills to be champions for a risk-aware culture in their teams and across the whole organization.
Wow, that's a lot. Shows how many different training needs there are to make a truly risk-aware workforce. To show how this works in real life, they give an example of a company dealing with health and safety risks. What are the main takeaways from that?
That example shows how important it is to have clear guidelines, specific procedures, and good awareness training for everyone when it comes to health and safety. It highlights that higher risk activities need specific procedures, and you should get legal advice for sensitive stuff to make sure you're following the rules.
Okay.
Making that info easy to find on the intranet and encouraging feedback from employees so you can keep improving, that's also important. Basically, this example shows how targeted training helps everyone understand the risks, be open about them, and actively work to manage them, no matter what their job is. When you're figuring out what health and safety training you need, the example says to consider each employee's abilities, what they already know, and the specific risks of their job. They also mention that new hires need training when they start, people in new roles need it, younger or less experienced workers might need more attention, and everyone needs refresher training sometimes.
Right.
And the risk assessment process itself should show you if any extra training is needed to make sure people can do their jobs safely and well.
They also give some general examples of when risk training's needed, like for new managers or people who've been promoted, when people take on new roles, when procedures change after an incident, either internally or at a competitor, and just as a refresher, which might even be a legal requirement in some industries. Those all seem like good reasons to start or update training.
Absolutely. Those are key moments where the right training can make a big difference.
Yeah.
Whether it's getting new people on board with how your organization manages risk, giving people the skills they need for new responsibilities, learning from what's happened to prevent it happening again, or just reminding everyone about those core risk management principles.
Now let's look at those guiding principles for risk communication that the article outlines.
Yeah.
What are some important things to keep in mind when you're putting together messages about risk?
It highlights a few crucial things. First, know who you're talking to, your stakeholders. Understand what they care about, what they're worried about, and what they already know about the risk. Second, use simple language that everyone can understand, but be ready to give more details if you need to. Third, stick to objective info. Separate the facts from your own opinions. Fourth, be honest and transparent, and think about what your audience already knows when you're putting the message together. Fifth, when things are uncertain, be upfront about what you do and don't know, and explain what you're doing to get more info or manage that uncertainty. Sixth, be careful when comparing different risks, and when explaining something new, try to use familiar examples so people can relate. Seventh, focus on a few key messages, keep it clear, concise, ideally no more than 3 or 4 main points. And finally, always be ready to answer questions, give people more info or clarification if they need it.
These are good rules for communication in general, but they're especially important with something as complex and sensitive as risk. Then they mention the whistleblowing investigation process. Why is having a good system for whistleblowing an important part of risk communication and management?
Because it gives people a safe way to report serious concerns.
Okay.
If they see something.